Hello, Tile friends. Welcome back to another episode of Tile Money, the podcast where we discuss the business of being a tile contractor. I am your host, Luke Miller. I am a licensed tile contractor in California myself. This podcast is brought to you by the NTCA. They are proud sponsors of this podcast. They are concerned for your welfare as a tile contractor, as well as Laticrete International. Thank you for sponsoring this podcast, Laticrete. Today, friends, I've got a great interview. I've got Tom Smith with Bluegrass Flooring, and Tom has an interesting background. You know, he was working in the public sector, administrating over $250 million a year in public projects and in charge of a staff of 30 people. So I am really interested to see how he went from there to where he is today as a tile contractor and why he loves what he's doing and what he has to say. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. How are you?
Hey, I'm good, Luke. Thanks for having me on today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. I'm really glad that you reached out to me and shared your bio with me, and we're getting to know each other, and I'm really appreciating it.
Excellent.
So why don't you take us from the top? I mean, it's not every day that a tile contractor has a background as colorful and as large as yours.
Okay. I started when I graduated from high school in 1981. I enlisted in the Army. I knew that I did not want to go to college. Looking back, I have some regrets on that, but that was the path that I chose. I was airborne infantry, was stationed attached to the 82nd Airborne Division. And after I did my enlistment, I got out and got into the construction trades. Mm-hmm. I knew early on that I did not want to be the guy in the ditch or on the end of a broom or a shovel. So I wanted to try to progress, and it didn't take me very long before next thing I know, I'm a foreman. Then I'm a superintendent. Then I'm a project manager. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that I've never been afraid to work. Mm-hmm. I was always the guy that if there was overtime, I volunteered. If a Saturday had to be work for something, I did it. I volunteered. I always just did whatever it took and tried to be that I later learned the term is a company man.
Right.
It always paid in spades for me because I typically, over my career working for other people, I made more money than my counterparts around me, had better benefits than they did. But there was a lot of sacrifice for that. It was a lot of, 10, 12-hour days, 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week. And I ended up getting into, in the 90s, in the early 90s, I got hired became a friend of mine, but was a developer that I did some work for into an architectural firm, and I was hired as a construction administrator. For those of you that don't know what a construction administrator is, that is typically who you see if you do commercial work out in the field as the architect. It's very rarely is the actual on big public projects is the actual architect ever out there. It's an administrator. So I handled the jobs from the time they left the design studio and went to the street to bid. I took care of pre-bid meetings with the contractors and with the owners. I did the bid opening, did pre-construction meetings. I executed, negotiated all the paperwork, all the contracts and everything. I was basically at the top of a pyramid between, it was me at the top and the owner and the contractor. These two were not allowed to communicate with each other. Everything had to go up and then back down again. Yeah. And, like I said, I reviewed pay applications and that sort of stuff. And I was fortunate. I got hired for probably one of the largest architectural firms in the Eastern United States. We had our main office was here in Lexington. We had a branch in Atlanta, a branch in Louisville, and a branch in St. Louis. I mainly did HUD projects for them. Okay. Did about $1 billion worth of HUD work for them all over the Eastern United States. I worked in South Carolina, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Georgia, up in New York. So I traveled quite a bit, but they were one-day hops. I would fly out in the morning, fly back in the evening. Long days, right. 12, 14, 16 days sometimes. Yeah. But I was home every night.
Yeah. What it's worth.
And what I learned, it was a great job. Here's a young guy I never set foot in college, and here I am. I'm wearing tailor-made suits and hand-painted silk ties, and I had my shoes custom made. Wearing $5,000 watch and $300 ink pen and all that stuff. Running these huge projects or administering these projects, and I loved it. I thought that's what I was going to do forever.
Yeah.
But after years of working with a lot of the alphabet gangs in the federal government, I've worked with the Bureau of Prisons, Department of Justice, as I said, HUD. I've worked with the Corps of Engineers. I've worked with a lot of state and local governments. I've worked hand in hand with the Kentucky Department of Education on schools. I did quite a few schools here in the state. And I was disillusioned by the politics that were involved in the public sector. I'm from the school of when somebody's a donkey, you tell them they're a donkey.
Yeah.
And, no, you can't do that to some princess that's been appointed to some position of great authority and power. Granted, they didn't have a lot over me, but they could definitely make my job harder than it had to be. And I ended up, I got tired of it. And it just, to me, got to the point where it was not worth the time I was putting in. And I left. I left the public sector and I went into the private sector. And I got hired as a project manager for a luxury builder here in Lexington that's been in business for about, 80 years now. And I built, I bult a 14,000 foot home for them. I built a 12,000 foot home for them. And I did a $35 million executive townhouse development for them. I basically took a 10 dirt that had 2 farm ponds on it and put all the infrastructure in and put 108 of these executive or luxury townhouses. I put elevators in a few of them, and they were anywhere from 2,500 to 3,400 square feet, and had a price tag of anywhere from 400 to some of them got up to $700,000, $900,000. I discovered a different set of problems and issues with there, and that was dealing with contractors on the residential side. These are guys that are not used to, big, thick contracts and liquidated damages and, the obligations that you have to make to meet a schedule on a commercial type or a public type project. And they didn't try, for the most part. And even though we were doing high-end work, it was still pretty frustrating, when we were getting behind on something. Things happen on a job. You've been a contractor, you are a contractor, things have a way of happening. Yeah. But to me, those have always been an opportunity to succeed and not a problem. Let's do what we need to do and get this behind us so we can move forward. Even if you've got to put all the blame on me, I've got big shoulders. I'll take it all. Okay, it's my fault. How do we get forward? And it was hard. What ended up becoming was that all these contractors, these subcontractors that I worked with, their shortcomings became my shortcomings, and I had to figure out, all of their problems for them. It's, and it's like, why don't you come to me with solutions? I want to hear something's wrong or something's up, but how are we going to fix it? How are we going to move forward? And it just, it just bogged me down. Yeah. So after, I think I did that for about 4 years, and I'd always wondered what it was like to be a subcontractor. I really and truly did. I got to, after being at the very top of the game and starting off in the ditch on a broom, but I got up to, I guess, the brass ring, you could say, in the construction industry, and then started sliding back down. Like I said, I wondered what it was like to be a subcontractor. Yeah. So, like example, today, when I got up at 6 this morning, it was about 25 degrees here in Lexington, and the wind chill was 14 degrees. Wow. I went to my job, and the heat wasn't on. It's just a simple phone call to the contractor or to whoever I'm working for. Hey, the heat's not on. Call me when it's on, and we'll be back. Yeah. I don't have to figure out how to get the heat on it and deal with that kind of stuff. So it's allowed me a lot more control over my own destiny, I guess, if you will. Yeah. And my stress levels are, they're next to nothing. They really and truly are, because if something really goes wrong, generally it's my fault. It's something I did, not somebody else did, something somebody else did that blew up in my face, and now I've got to deal with it. So, that's what kind of brought me to where I'm at now. I've always enjoyed working with my hands. Even when I was working full time for somebody, I still did side work and did contracting and stuff on the side. That was my toy money. That's how I afforded motorcycles, boats, race cars, and that kind of thing. My ex-wife wasn't too thrilled about me taking my regular salary out of our budget to afford my recreation. Yeah. So, so that's what I did. And, when I first started off, I did hardwood, tile, laminate, almost anything I could get my hands on to do. And it took, I guess, about probably about 10 years, maybe 12, might have been 12 years before I finally just made a decision to just do tile. I got away from everything else, and I may still have all my tools, but I could stay busy doing tile. Yeah. I was able to pay my bills and keep my health busy, and it didn't make sense to me to juggle 2 or 3 different sets of tools. And pain and okay, well, do we have this today? Do we have that today? Unless you want to drive a semi around, or a big box truck or something like that, you're never going to have everything that you need on your truck, and it's easy to forget. So it's easier from that aspect for me to where I only have to maintain one set of tools. It also allows me more money in my budget every year to buy more tools to do tile with, and be more productive and therefore hopefully more profitable. To be able to do that, because I'm a big believer in having the right tools to do the job. Yeah, it makes all the difference in the world. But I'm starting my 17th year in January, and I haven't looked back.
And so today, is it just you, or you and an apprentice, or how does that look?
No, I've got right now. I have 3 full-time guys that work for me. Sometimes that goes up to 5 or 6. It just all depends. And
so are you still installing in the field, or no?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I typically, I get the jobs together, obviously.
Sure.
For the guys, I go to the job in the morning and make sure everybody understands. Make sure my lead guy understands. All right, here's what we're doing, and then I can leave them alone. But it took me years to get to that point, to where I could do that. I mean, I worked out there every day for about 11 years. Every day I was out there from the time we worked for the job until the time we left, and then did estimates and all the rest of the bookkeeping and everything else in the interim, in the meantime. And it just got to the point for me to where, I can make more money without if I were out there working every day. I actually have I don't know, some people say it's weird, but it almost gives me as much or more of a sense of pride knowing that I am offering an opportunity to help several other people support their family.
Well, for sure.
That means a lot, and like I said, some people are like, go for the money. It's not all about the money. I know that sounds kind of weird too, but
and I appreciate it. And thank you for getting us up to speed here. I mean, it's not every day that I get to talk to somebody with such a background as yours. And you're really a man with a lot of perspective in the construction industry, which is great. And one of the things I love about having these conversations is, once in a while I get to talk to someone like yourself who looks at, the tile trade a little bit differently, because you have a different background. We have so many people in this industry that are 2nd generation, 3rd generation, and they're doing things the way they were taught. They're doing things the way their father and grandfather did it a lot of times. And when we can have somebody like you come a little bit maybe sideways or at a different perspective, and realize like, hey, there's opportunity here. You looked at it and you didn't see problems. You saw opportunity when you got into the private sector. And I really appreciate that. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. How did you, what were some of the eye-opening moments? You talked a little bit about it when you talked about the, how the subcontractors in the private sector were kind of relating to you a lot differently. They had a lot of problems. They came to you. How was that kind of a revelation in your mind? Would you say that kind of put you on this path toward being a subcontractor?
Well, getting back to public work, the contractors and subcontractors are a lot more accountable. They have a lot more risk involved and a lot more on the line, and especially projects that have liquidated damages. Trust me, I took that money, for my owner, for the customer, and I was ruthless about it. I had no mercy, and so because of that, and a lot of it's much bigger numbers too. These guys, they're true businessmen, and they're going to do what it takes. They would rather have to pay a few days of overtime to their guys versus risking getting into $5,000 a day in liquidated damages. There were some of the projects that we worked on. Liquidated damages were literally calculated by the minute, and and they were big numbers. So what I learned actually was that a lot of these contractors, the general contractors that I dealt with, we provided a schedule, a duration, not a schedule. We provided a duration, and they had to provide us a schedule. So they had to back into that finish date and show us, this is how I'm going to get here. Here's where my milestones are, and this kind of thing. And they were just more accountable about things. So they knew when something was off, they had to get it caught up. But these guys were actually, when they would look at the duration, they knew right off the bat, I can't build this building that fast. Okay, well, here's liquidated damages. I think it's going to take me a month longer than what the architect has said. And they'll bid a month's worth of liquidated damages and have it built into their price, so they're already anticipating that. Hey, if they can work a miracle and pull a hat trick, they just put a bunch of extra money in their pocket, and good for them. I mean, public work bidding is pretty, it's pretty critical. There were all kinds of tricks that I learned that these contractors did. I mean, I went to the FAME. There is actually a change order school. We've all heard that term before, by the change order artists. And I actually attended a one-day seminar that was, that wasn't the title of it. I don't recall because it's been many years ago. But the gist of it was how to legitimately be able to ask for change orders on a project. And one of the things they emphasized was keeping your hands clean, being forthright with everything and keeping a clear trail of paperwork and communication and like that. And there are, I hear a lot. And the standard operating procedure about change orders is that you don't proceed until you have an executed change order from the owner or the contractor, depending on what your role is in the project. And that's a good rule of thumb. And that's typically even the way the contracts are the verbiage is worded in there. However, there are times and instances in the effort to keep a project moving forward, as long as you're doing everything you're supposed to do, that you're actually entitled to and will, if it comes down to litigation, get a change order for something because you were keeping the project on track. It's a little deeper than that, but that's just kind of just a quick paraphrase of what it is. But there are classes out there that you can take that teach you how to go after change orders.
I believe it.
What to look for. Oh, I used to go through it all the time with these guys. They would orders for the most ridiculous thing. My favorite stamp was my big red stamp that said denied. I sent it back to them, but so getting back to what you asked, the residential guys, again, they had no solutions for anything. Typically, I won't paint them all with the same brush.
Sure,
but it's like, okay, look, guys, when I was building those townhouses, this unit's got to close next week, and you're not done in there yet, and out there, I was kind of flexible to a degree. I would always ask them, how long is it going to take you? And you gave me the timeline, brother, and if you couldn't fit in that amount of time, I need a good reason why. And don't come up to me the day before and tell me that you got another week or two worth of work to do over here. I don't want to hear that. And, and some of the responses I got, from these guys, are you going to come in and work this weekend, try to get this unit going? Well, I'm self-employed. I don't work on the weekends, and I just, like I said, it got to a point where I couldn't deal with that sort of stuff anymore. And I got tired of my phone ringing. It started at 7 o'clock in the morning and went till 7 o'clock at night. And, and on weekends, the customers, the homeowners, they didn't care. I couldn't even lunch. It got to the point where I wouldn't even answer my phone, not even for the office at lunch. Because people would call, oh, are you eating lunch? Yeah. Oh, I was hoping I would catch you while you weren't busy. It's like, you don't think I deserve 45 minutes to sit down and not talk to somebody about this job during the day, And so, when I got started, I actually I subbed to my flooring contractor. And, he was as bad as my Army recruiter was in what he promised or what was delivered. My recruiter lied to me. And so did my flooring contractor. Yeah. And I think I lasted with him about 6 months, and I hopped to another store, and I was there for about 6 months. The biggest problem I had was it's hard to make money. They don't here in this area. It's absurd what they pay these guys to do any type of floor covering, reeling, but to do tile and hardwood, it's nuts. You cannot make a living at it, unless you have thousands of open square feet that you can go in there and just pummel. You can't go into a house every day and do 80 feet of tile or 16 feet of tile in an entry or a 20 square foot backsplash and not for square foot rates like they're paying, like $2, $2.25 a foot.
Yeah, that's
you
crazy.
can't do it. So I realized that, if I'm going to survive in this, I'm going to have to find a niche for myself. Yeah. And I started leaning more towards the custom work. And that's where I kind of feel like I was able to separate myself from a lot of other people, because they don't have the skill set to do that. They're just go in there, they ground and pound and they're out, and that's it. You find cigarette butt underneath a tile somewhere if you ever go to tear it up, or we all know what we see as a result of a lot of that. And it's worked out pretty well for me. That's the reputation I've developed over the years here in town. And I refer to myself as a high-end tile installer. Yeah. We do everything from mild to wild, is what I tell my customers. We'll do the basic stuff if you're willing to pay for a professional installation. Yeah. And I warn them, you're going to find somebody cheaper. You're going to find a lot of people cheaper, than we are. Yeah. And one of my philosophies has always been from day one. My slogan, I guess, if you will, is custom quality, always guaranteed. Yeah. And that's part of my brand. Is that when I started this, I never had any ideas of being the biggest. I can't do all the tile work in Lexington. I don't want to do all the tile work in Lexington. My goal is that hopefully people will one day refer to me as the best, or one of the best. And, the philosophy that I've passed along to my guys over the years, and my girls, I've had some women that have worked for me too over the years, is that we don't have exclusive rights to anything. Every piece of material that we can get our hands on, so can anybody else in town. The only way that we can separate ourselves from everybody else in town is what we do with that material after we get our hands on it and to our customers' home. And and the perception that we deliver for service, a big thing is I always try to undersell and over deliver. If you go to, I participated on Angie's List for a few years and really pumped my customers for, go leave me a review, leave me an honest review. And it's resounding through the reviews that we felt like they did more than they said that they were going to do. Oh, and that's the feeling. And that's how you get repeat business. That's how you get word of mouth is always go that extra mile. And if you price the job right, you can do that. Another day of labor is not going to break me on a project, and I read posts, and I don't mean to put anybody down, not at all, but, I read some posts sometimes in some of these groups where, somebody's crying over, being short a bag of grout. Yeah. Oh, I spent another 35. If a bag of grout is going to make or break you on a job, you really need to reconsider, how you're pricing your work. And I also hear too, a lot of guys that, they talk about, oh, well, in my area, this is all the, market bear, for a lack of a better term. And that's not the truth either. The customers, as you and I well know, they're out there that are willing to pay for work. And anybody will find out that once you start charging what the work is worth, you'll make enough money that you don't have to kill yourself every day, 6 or 7 a week, and still be able to earn a living, pay your help well, and have some peace of mind and be able to, have some time to enjoy the money that you made. It's like the stores around here. I told you earlier, they don't pay anything. They're bottom of the barrel. And I've got a call from all of them over the years because, we're going through tile setters like water and whoever it is that refers me to them from one of the distributors. Well, I'll send you a guy, but he's not going to do it for the numbers that you guys are paying. But you're not going to have any issues out of your tile anymore. And we just can't sell jobs for that. And I'm like, I'm booked out 8 to 10, 12 weeks at a time. Wow. I turn away as much or more work as I do every year. So if I can charge that much money for it, turn work away and stay busy, why can't you? Tile is a luxury item, in my opinion.
So how did you break away from the stores? What was that like? How did you break away from working for the stores? I mean, a lot of installers are caught in that loop. They're working for stores, and the stores are keeping them really busy to the point where they don't really have time to break away. They know they should, but yet the stores are feeding them work. So how do you have any tips for breaking away from that model?
I kind of got I got my web presence going, I got a website up, which my website currently, bluegrassflooring.com, has not been updated in 5 or 6 years. It's antiquated. I've gotten complacent about it because my phone rings, so I really need to update it. But, that and social media. And then, I started getting to know my reps. Mm-hmm. Started to get friendly with the managers and the staff at some of the local distributors here in town. I got into ProSource here locally, and we have been great partners for years now. They're a fantastic operation. I mean, they're all franchised. I guess I'm just lucky because the one that I have down the road for me, great people to work with. And I consider them part of my team, just like I do the people at the distributors where I purchase my material from and stuff, my setting materials and whatnot. They're my partners. We're all in this together. And by getting to know them and getting to know the reps, things just started to fall in place. I was hit and miss. Fortunately, I had some money saved up. My ex-wife had a pretty decent job, and I never borrowed a penny. Okay. That was one of the things. I told her when I quit my job, I told her I'm starting my own business. She was a little sketchy about it. And I told her, I said, I will never borrow any money. And if we're still starving in 5 years, I'll go get a job again. And that was said almost 17 years ago. And here I still, it's not without her. But it was just I just bit the bullet, and I did it. I already had a presence out there. Angie's List, I did advertise with them to be listed.
Was that a good?
It was a great thing for me in my area. It was phenomenal. Angie's List, I think, is garbage now due to the fact that anybody can go on there. It used to be you had to pay a membership fee as a consumer in order to be able to see reviews and whatnot about contractors and find contractors. Well, when Home Advisor bought them a year or so ago, they did away with all that. Right. And so my experience, what it was here locally, was that I didn't get very many tire kickers. Right. Most of my customers that I was getting calls from on Angie's List were educated. They've already done their homework. They already had an idea of what the ballpark cost of these things were going to be, and had realistic costs. So it was pretty good for me, and in several ways. One, kept me pretty busy at work. For a nominal contribution, I think I might have paid $2,000 a year, something like that, $2,200 a year to advertise with them. And they helped my business as well. I was fortunate to win, 5 or 6 of their, what they call Super Service Awards for being the highest customer rated, whatever, in your area. One year I won the Super Service Award for kitchen and bath remodeler, general remodeler, ceramic tile installation, flooring sales and installation. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the heck did I win for kitchen and bath remodeler and general remodeler when there are so many contractors here in town? Now, I do bath remodels. I'll go bath down to the studs and bring it back. And, and I've done some kitchens, not very many, a lot more bathrooms than I have kitchens. And I have background and the experience. I can build your entire house. There isn't really anything that I can't do to a residential or commercial structure. But I try to, and as time has gone by, I don't even like to cut a piece of wood anymore on a job. Yeah. I'm a tile contractor, and that is what I do. I do my prep and I install the material, and that's it. I don't want to get into putting your trim up and painting and doing your drywall and and all that. And on the full remodels that I do, I hire that out. I sub it all out. I always plumber. I always sub an electrician, a drywall guy, a painter. Can I do that stuff? Sure, I can. Am I going to be as good as somebody that does it 8 hours a day? Right. Chances, no, I'm not. Right. No more than some guy. And one of the analogies that I use with potential clients when I'm meeting with my customers is, this is all I do every day is tile. Do you want a guy coming in here or somebody coming into your home that last week they were building a deck and 2 weeks before that they were putting a roof on a house? You cannot, a lot of people, and I used to think the same way, hey, I'm a jack of all trades and a master, not a master of none, but I can do all of them as well as anybody that does that trade. That's just not true. Yeah. That's a young man's dream is what that is. And you get to a point to where, I would rather be excellent at one thing than to be okay or good at several things. I would rather sell at that one thing than to just, be right around here with 3 or 4 or 5 other different things. It's just, you'll be more profitable, that way at the end of the day. I promise you will.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to have a specialty and niche down something. How are you finding your help and how do you train them? What goes into that?
I have most of my help. They've been friends, to be honest with you.
Well, I missed that. What was that?
They've been my friends.
Oh, okay.
And I've been incredibly fortunate there over the years because they're able to separate the business from the friendship. Mm-hmm. They know they're on the job. I expect them to work, and they know what I expect from them. And they, a lot of times, will even set the standards higher for themselves than what I do. Hey, please outdo me. I love that, but I've been pretty fortunate with that. Right now, one of my son-in-laws works for me. I have another young man that works for me that, his father-in-law is one of my best friends. We've been friends for almost 30 years. He worked for me for about 12 years, recently went out on his own, and wished him well. We had reached a point to where, hey, he wasn't, he just felt like he needed to be on his own, sure. And I support him, with that. I'm not a begrudging man to make $1, because again, getting back to, he was always loyal to me, so I can't see him going out there and trying to steal customers away from me. Yeah. But again, I can't do all the tile work in Lexington, and I don't want to do it. So sure. More power to you, buddy. Go ahead, and I wish you well, wish you the best. But his son-in-law works for me, and he's been with me for about 4 years now. And I have another guy I guess he's been with me for about 6 months now, but I actually met on Instagram. Okay. He contacted me, and he's a fellow. He has a subcontracting company here in town. He's a tile installer. Okay. And, he's been in the trade for several years, but he's only been in business for maybe a year or so. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe he is, the hardest thing about, I think, being self-employed, especially in the beginning, is getting your phone to ring. Doing the work part, it's getting the phone and then dealing with all of that, dealing with the customer, dealing with, estimating and material ordering and expediting and check collecting and paying, everything that goes along with a business. Yeah. We partnered up on a job back in, I think, May. We did a huge renovation to a penthouse condominium in downtown Lexington. And for a contractor that I do some work for here and there. And I was overwhelmed. We had 92 days. We did a $1.2 million renovation in this condominium, replaced all the flooring. We did all the flooring in there, but all the trim was torn out, replaced. All the cabinets were torn out, replaced. There was electric added all over the, light fixtures, moved this, that, the next, 3 full bathrooms in there. And we cranked it. Great. It was a T&M job. Which I saw a discussion recently about on one of the groups, that, the thing about T&M, you can't lose, but you can't hit a lick either, Sure. And we've all had those days where, just the tile gods were smiling on us. Everything went well. And you sit back at the end of the day and you look at what you got done and you think to yourself, wow, after I pay everybody today, I made $5,000. And there is none of that T&M. It's pretty much it's just whatever your markup is for your burden and your profit, for your help and for yourself. But it's nice though, you turn in a payroll or an invoice and get a check for hours, so no matter what happens, you're going to be covered. But anyway, we partnered up together on that job, and he's one of the first things he did before he actually started coming to partner with me was he wanted to know, how I knew about these standards. And I told him about the NTCA handbook and the reference manual. Mm-hmm. Well, where can I get those? So I told him to go to the NTCA website, and he ordered them right then and there. Yeah. That is the first installer that I've talked to out of many here in town that had that actual interest in wanting to do it correctly. Yeah. So he wants to do things right. He does great work. He's very creative, and it's been mutually beneficial for both of us. I know how long it will last purely from his side of it. I don't know if because he's all but abandoned his own business.
Right.
And I don't, I don't know if he'll be comfortable doing that,
Yeah.
So, I'm just grateful for the opportunity that I have now, to go to work and send him out.
Yeah.
But one day he may say, hey, look,
Yeah. I mean, if you can keep him busy and offer him an attractive wage, and it might just work out. And I love that he found you on Instagram. That's great.
Yeah. And I don't really have a huge following, and I don't pay a whole lot of attention to any of the social media like I should. And I think a lot of that, again, getting back to my website, my phone rings.
Yeah, you're busy.
And I'm pretty selective about the work that I'll bid. I don't bid every job, and I'm fortunate to be in a place where I don't have to bid every job. I have very, very low overhead. I work out of my home. I have that luxury there, and so, like I said, I don't have to bid everything, and I don't have to bid everything to get it either. I used to be several years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, if I had an uncomfortable feeling about a potential customer, I would sit down and I'd put a bid of the job and I would double it. And then and the next thing I know, I'm getting these jobs.
Yeah.
And, some people just aren't worth working for, no matter how much money they're paying you.
Yeah.
So after a few of those, I was like, nah, I'm just not going to bid the job. And some people get offended about it, but I tell people now that are not referrals to me. A majority of my work is word of mouth. But the people that find me on the internet, they, when I meet with them and I talk with them, I'm pretty clear about it when I'm talking to them that it's a two-way interview. Mm-hmm. You're interviewing me to determine whether or not, you want to hire me to come and work in your home, but I'm also interviewing you to determine whether or not I think it's going to be a good fit for us, because not everybody is on the same, eye level with things. And if I'm uncomfortable about it, that's the one thing I've learned. Excuse me. And I've learned the hard way a few times, 2 or 3 times over the course of my business is to never let greed overrun your guts. Mm.
What are some clues that you're looking for while you're in the house? Kind of what is your strategy to kind of weed out those bad customers?
Well, one of the, you kind of have to know people, and you have to, understand how people are too.
Sure.
When somebody's being friendly with you, is genuinely interested in what you're saying, and that, they're not being standoffish or aloof or, anything like that. You want to, sometimes that's an air of arrogance to me for whatever reason, and I have zero tolerance for that kind of stuff right there. We're all the same. I don't care what you do for a living. I don't care how much money you make. You are no better than me just because I have holes in the knees of my blue jeans and the toes worn out of my shoes. You're not better than I am. So, we're going to treat each other with respect, and unfortunately, not everybody has that mentality. And another thing that I'll do too is I'll throw a number out there.
Really?
Yeah. It's not, hey, don't hold me to this, but I'm just guessing based on previous projects that I've done similar to this, that this is about what it's going to cost you. Like for me, for example, and I know this doesn't apply to everybody, and it's, certainly geographic too, depends on where you're at. But for me to come in and do a 3x5 tub to shower conversion, you're going to be in it about $7,000 at the bottom end. Now that's complete. That's a new shower valve. We put a new drain in. No fancy stuff. You'll get a niche in there and a bench and your shower glass and a middle of the road tile. You're going to get crazy mosaics. You're not going to get racing stripes or deco bands, accents, whatever. This is a basic installation, and it's going to go up from there. And a lot of times you can just feel people out right then and there. I get a poker face every now and again that I don't read, but not very often. And you have to be able to, though. When you do something like that, though, if you throw a budget number out and you sticker shock them like that. You need to be able to quantify yourself. I see a lot of guys, and I don't know what's right or wrong. I just know what works best for me. I know that there's people out there that, you'll get a scope of work, and at the bottom, it's a total.
Right.
That's what they're giving to their customers. Myself, I do line item estimates.
Mm-hmm.
I break everything out by line item: demolition, waterproofing, plumbing, electrical. Everything's out, and I have a number to it. And I always tell my customers, I'm not afraid to show you what I'm charging for this stuff, and what I'm making, to do it. I said that I'm in business to make money. I'm not a handyman. I quit a $120,000 a year job to do this, and I need to make that much money or more. So this is what I'm doing, and then also further quantifying by explaining to them that we only use premium materials.
Mm-hmm.
I don't use $10 a bag thin sets. Can't tell you the last time I put a piece of cement board on or down. We don't use them. So we're a best practice method contractor, and that's going to separate me in pricing, from a lot of different people. Another thing that I discuss with my potential customers is the first thing that come off of our trucks and the last thing that go on them are drop cloths, brooms, and a shop vac.
Yeah.
A lot of people miss that. It is our responsibility, even though we're flooring contractors, we need to protect the areas, in these homes that we're working at. And that's literally, every morning, that's the first thing that I have 3 foot by various length runners, the 20-ounce canvas runners. And I have stacks of them, but that's the first thing that goes out from where we enter the house to where we're working at. Every day, our material is recondensed, cleaned, moved around. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're in demolition, whether you're in whatever stage of the process that you're in. It should always look better at the end of that day than when you got there that morning. And I think I think a lot of people miss that. I think they get so wrapped up in just the job itself that they don't think about the little details and the perception that creates with people. It goes a long way with people when they know that you're going out of your way to protect their home and to keep it clean. We've all heard the horror stories about people hiring contractors and the things that they do in their homes. All my guys, well, with the exception of one, 3 of us smoke. We smoke cigarettes. And I saw a discussion about that in one of the groups the other day. To each his own. Yeah. If you don't want to hire me because I smell like a Marlboro when I walk in the door, I'm good with that. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. But you're never going to find a cigarette butt on your property anywhere. We're certainly not going to smoke in your house or in your garage or anything like that. We're going to be out front whenever we do it, but they appreciate that too. It's their perception of things. I've had guys tell me over the years when I'm going over them with my standards for cleanliness and on site protocols. Oh well, I'll treat it like it's my grandmother's house. No, you won't. You're going to treat it like it's Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so's house. Because for all I know, you put your feet on the table over at your grandmother's house. Yeah. That might be acceptable for you, but it is not here,
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I love that attitude, that cleanliness.
We're a service company.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it absolutely does. Hands down. We spend, I'll bet it's an hour a day, that we, and by the time we roll out in the morning and roll up in the afternoon, all the drop cloths get shaken out and everything. If we're going up, carpeted steps, working on a second floor like we are right now, that gets a new piece of carpet protector every day. We take it off at night, put a new one on in the morning. I don't want my homeowner worrying about tripping and, busting their tail with a pair of socks on, coming down they're used to a carpeted set of steps. Now they step on that platform, down they go. Because my demographic is, with the exception of a few young professionals here and there, it's mostly people that are, I would say, in their 60s and above. Okay. Is the demographic, the ones with the money, with disposable cash, the ones that I'm working for. And it boils down to risk and liability too. Yeah. I out of good heart and conscience don't want anything to happen to them, tripping, slipping, going down the steps. I also don't want to get sued over it either. And the potential is there.
I'm positive, that you've taken this into consideration when you're thinking about your prices. And that's how you've kind of dialed it in. Hey, I know we're going to spend an hour a day on this, so I need to charge for that. How are you coming up with your prices? Do you consider profit, markup, and all that good stuff?
I don't, even though I understand profit and markup. in a lot of ways, I pretty much fly by the seat of my pants with things.
Okay.
I'll be perfectly honest with you about it. I don't want to be the businessman, but I have no choice. So I'm fairly lax about a lot of things. I've been doing it long enough to know that I know how long it's going to take us to do things. And, I've got a day rate figured out, for what I know I have to pay my guys and how long I know it's going to take them. And I know to add extra time to that. And I do on material that I provide, I do mark up the material 30%, whether it's just sundries, setting materials, installation materials, or the actual tile or stone itself. There are times when I do sell directly to my customer. I'll meet them over at Dow Tile or over at ProSource or something like that. And I go through the whole design and selection process with them. And guess what? You're paying me 30% for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how business works, and for me, it's, again, I don't know that I've ever truly lost money on a job. That was my own fault. Mm. I've been, not paid, I think 3 times in 16 years. I've not been paid by a customer. And
how did you handle
that? Really, there's really not a whole lot you can do. You can file lien if you want to. Hey, go right ahead. You better be quick. You better hope that, generally when it gets to that point, there's going to be other lien holders in front of you, and I'm not saying don't file a lien. So to anybody that's listening to this show, I'm not saying don't file a lien. It can be good for you. Where it would be very beneficial for a contractor to file a mechanics lien would be if they're getting ready to sell the property. Because they're not going to be able, when they do a title search and a deed search on, they're not going to be able to until that lien is satisfied. As far as litigation goes, unless it's a ridiculous amount of money, it's pointless. When it comes to that, the only people that win are the attorneys. You're not going to get money. And even at the end of the day, if you did get a judgment, it's still no guarantees you're going to get paid, but you're still going to have to pay your attorney, and you have your lost time and wages from, having to divert your attention away from your business to fool around with a lawsuit. I was fortunate. I think the biggest one I ever got was about $7,800. They never come at an opportune time. That was 2 weeks before Christmas, about 7 or 8 years ago. A lot of it was due to a cultural difference. I was working for some Italians here in town in a restaurant, and they just, it was a cultural difference. They do things differently in other countries. And unfortunately, a lot of these folks that come here, you have to kind of gently remind them that, hey, look, we're not in Italy. That's not how we do things here, and like for an example, we did 5,000 feet of engineered hardwood in there and about 1,000 feet of tile. And I bought like 8 guys in there with me, and we blasted that hardwood in like 5 days. Did this restaurant in it. Well, I gave her a square foot price. It was a unit price, labor and installation to install the material. And when she saw that, she was paying, $45,000 in a week. You're making too much money. I need a receipt for the wood. So I wrote her a receipt for the wood. No. I need a receipt from where you bought it from. I was like, no, you don't get that. You bought the wood from me. It doesn't matter what I paid. We agreed to a square foot price to furnish labor and material to install this, and that's what you're paying. And it just went downhill from there. And the other 2 instances, it was also another cultural difference. One was an Egyptian couple. They were both doctors, very intelligent people, building a big house here in town. And I kept hearing from them. Well, in my country, we only pay about 25 cents a square foot to butt set marble, And I told her, I said, well, maybe you need to hire you a crew over there, bring them over here and put them up for 6 months in your house while they tile your house. Just don't let them into town, because if you get around to installers and find out, well, we're getting to do this, you're liable to have a mutiny on your head. So, it's happened, and it happens to everybody. But as far as, dealing with it, I think the best thing to do is just to bite the bullet and go on. It's really, it's and even if you do get the money, let's say it's a couple $1,000, $4,000 or $5,000, or even 10. We'll go to 10,000. It's going to take you a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3, and you might get lucky and get that money. By that time, it's not even like you got the money. You're already through it. It's really not even like a bonus windfall or anything. So to me, and I don't mean to be discouraging to anybody. And I'm trying to tell anybody else, how they should handle their.
Everybody's situation is different.
Yeah. But it's just in my opinion, it's just that it's better to go on and get it behind you. That way, it's not a constant reminder to you that's being drug out over the course of litigation or anything like that. You don't have to worry about getting an attorney bill once a month and that kind of stuff. And it allows you to stay focused so that you can move forward, pay attention to what you really need to pay attention to. And that's growing your business and making sure your business is profitable.
Yeah. How are you? You mentioned a few times that you get a lot of repeat customers. In fact, I think you went so far as to say you almost don't work for anybody unless they're a referral. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Are you staying in Are you staying in touch with past customers in any way, shape, or form, or how does that work for you?
Now, to be honest with you, I don't.
Okay.
I've got a customer database. I've thought over the years, about maybe sending Christmas cards out at Christmas or something like that. But no, I typically don't. I'm friends on Facebook with a handful of them, and it's always nice to see them when they're liking and commenting about how beautiful other projects are that we're doing. And I can't wait till we have enough money saved up for you to come back and do our other bathroom.
Yeah, that's a good way. Facebook.
But, I don't typically do anything to. Like as far as like a mass email or a mailer or something like that. Nah, I don't. They refer me to their friends, whenever their friends are talking about going to have some tile work done, they'll tell me, call this guy, and then if they're going to have anything else done. And my customers know too, even though I'm strictly just a tile guy, for my customers I have already, I'll do whatever you want for you. Last year, I remodeled a basement for a couple that I guess it was 5 years ago. We remodeled 2 bathrooms for them, and they basement done, and they were like, "We don't want anybody else. We don't care what you charge us. This is what we want you to do down here." And I was like, "Okay," and I would rather do that for my customers that I already have, just so that I know they're going to get a decent job. They're not going to get taken advantage of, because again, all hear these horror stories about unqualified labor. And that's across the board. It isn't just in our industry, it's everywhere. And so they're customers of mine. So I kind of try to, take them under my wing a little bit and make sure they're going to, be taken care of for their other household projects.
Yeah. Okay. What's one lesson you've had to learn the hard way?
I talked about it earlier. And that is to follow my gut feeling instead of greed and going after the money. It's if I have a bad feeling about a job, I just really, really pay attention to that stuff. And I don't care how bad at the time I may need to work. I live by the same philosophy that I think a lot of people do is I can go broke at home. Versus going out there busting my butt and going broke, so, if I get a bad feeling, I've learned to stay away from it. And that job that I was briefly talking about, for that restaurant, same thing. I knew at the beginning, I didn't, I probably shouldn't do this, but it was like, $75,000 job, it's hard to say no, and because I knew my numbers were going to be good on it.
Yeah.
And, but I knew, when I got the deposit from them, I got a $10,000 check for a deposit and it bounced. I knew then, they always have this excuse of being able to get wire money over from Italy, evidently wiring anything over $10,000 is an act of Congress since 9/11, because they're tracking money.
Wow.
And so, and that was, I should have known then. The signs were there, the flags were there.
Yeah.
The couple. When I went and met with her, she's telling me your prices are too high. And I told her, well, that's my number, and well, we really want to work with you. That's why I really want to do your job. This is a 14,000 foot house. all marble everywhere. There was 6,000 feet of radiant heat going in there, wire heat going in, slab walls, and all the showers. There was like 9 bathrooms in this place. I wanted to do that project. And, she just kept trying. I told her, nah, that's my number. So I wished her the best of luck. We met at her house, and it was all dried in, and it was well into finishes, when I met with her. And I got up and I walked out of the kitchen, and they just found a piece of plywood on a hinge with a lock on it for the door there. Oh, no, wait, come back. I said, no, we're not doing this. Good luck. And I got my truck and went down the long driveway, and I made it down there and got to the end of her road, and she called me. Okay, we'll pay your price. Come back. I should have just kept on going.
Yeah.
So I knew that it was going to be, a headache and a pain. And what that one there would have ended up being, it's like I ended up being her general contractor. And I tried to explain to them, look, you're holding me up because you're not giving me information that I clearly laid out in my estimate and proposal to you. I'm not here to coordinate your plumber, your electrician, your HVAC guy. Where's your builder?
Yeah.
I need to tell him what I need. I don't need to meet with your carpenter or your plumber or whoever to tell him what he needs to do. Yeah. I'm a tile guy, and I wanted paid for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to coordinate other trades. I want a supervision fee, you're a crook and, you steal from people. No, I don't. I'm an honest man. So, so like I said, and I got burned there for some money too. It was just a few $1,000s and I learned, I don't, and I do everything on a handshake. I have signed contract in 16 years with anything. I send an estimate over to them that I do in QuickBooks. And it outlines the payment plan in there. And I figure as soon as they give me a check for the deposit, you've agreed. You've agreed to this arrangement or this agreement, this estimate that I've sent over to you. But you got to put a lot of work into it too. You have to do within reason whatever it takes to make the customer happy. The customer's not always right. Yeah. I don't believe in that philosophy at all. The customer is not always right, but still, it gets back to, when I was talking about the change order class, you have to keep your hands clean. Yeah. Done everything that you're supposed to do. And I found like even on extras, I have had very, very little problems collecting for extras. Yeah. On projects. And a lot of times I don't even, hey, I can't go any further because I'm going to need more money for this. I just do it. Yeah. I have found by far and large with the majority of people, and this is the way I'll typically approach them, is, hey, look, this, and this, I didn't plan on doing this. And we certainly couldn't see this coming. And I'm not demanding this money from you. Yeah. But I would like to submit it for your consideration. Yeah. I've never not been paid. I don't have the attitude I did this and it was extra and you owe me now. I've always put that on them, and quantified myself, this is one for some more money. Communicate. What are your thoughts on it? And, if you feel it's legitimate, write me the check, and I'm trying to think, as I'm saying this, that, has anybody ever told me, well, too bad. Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard that, from a customer. They always pay. I had one, this has been 4 years ago. It was a $1,500 upcharge at the end of the job. We did, the labor on this bathroom was $15,000. It was all travertine, wainscot, heated floor, a shower. Excuse me. Well, when I did the material selection with them, it was all travertine, and we picked 18 by 18. We found a color, or she did, with 18 by 18s, 9 by 18s, and I think it was a 3 by 6 or something. Well, when it came time to where she was going to order the material, and I met her back over at the Pro Source showroom again, just say, let's revisit all this one more time to make sure we're all on the right page. She didn't like the color. She picked another color. Well, they didn't offer all those sizes. Well, what are we going to do? Well, I can cut them. So that's what we did. We cut 8 by 8s for the floor, cut a border, go around the floor. We cut the 9 by 18s for everything. There wasn't an 18 by 18 piece of stone in that bathroom anywhere. Right. And when it was all said and done, when I submitted my final bill, I submitted an extra $1,500 for a new blade on my saw, and I paid a guy for probably 7 days to stand out. Yeah, cut cut all this stuff down, and they were like, well, we didn't think it was going to be extra. And I've already done several other projects for these people over years previous. And I didn't think they were going to pay me, but when it was all said and done, they put it in there and they said, you're right. It was a lot of extra work. And, so they were fair about it. That same customer, we did a powder room for them before we did that bathroom. And we did 12 by 12 travertine up the walls. We did the whole wall in this powder room, but we did 12 by 12s and, excuse me. Yeah. And I meant to turn that off earlier. And then we put a chair in, and then we did, I showed her 4x4 tumble travertine. We did her backsplash before that with this 4x4 tumble, and they still had some left. So all you got to do is, we'll have to buy a few more boxes, but this is what we'll do. Well, she came home from work that day. We put the 48-inch stuff up and already started on the 4x4s. And she's like, oh, no. Oh, I don't like that. I don't like that. I said, well, that's what we agreed. I told you it was going to be the exact same material as your backsplash. Yeah, I don't like that. I want it to be smooth. We put honed and filled in 12 by 12. Okay. I said, well, they don't make, a 4x4 or a 6x6, and that. It's 12 by 12 is the smallest. I said, but I can cut them. And she paid us to tear off everything that those guys put up there, patch the drywall back, and paid me to cut 12 by 12s into 6x6s and do a diagonal from the top of the chair up to the ceiling. And problem with it. So, I think if you're open and honest with people about things, and again, I've said this word many times, is you have to be able to quantify yourself. Most business people and most intelligent homeowners, when you can explain to them why, I've had them stop me mid-sentence before. Nope, I'm going to go ahead and pay it. Because they understand, that it's not, I forgot this or I forgot that or anything like that. We did everything I said we were going to do.
No, that's good advice. I really appreciate it. Well, Tom, I really appreciate everything you've shared. You've shared a lot of knowledge. You've got a lot of history, and you've got a great, successful business. Congratulations. I know some of this is going to really, have a good positive impact on my audience. So I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to be here. I'll be glad to come back anytime if you ever run out of people to interview. One thing I did want to say real quick, sounds like we're about to end this podcast, is I want to give a shout out to Ron Nash.
For sure.
That man is amazing. And if the rest of us in this industry, especially the people that are quasi-connected to him through these Facebook groups and stuff like that, if you don't take advantage and go back through some of these podcasts that you've done with him and some of these, what are you guys calling those meetings that you have?
The Tile Money Tips or the business incubators?
Yeah, the incubators and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The knowledge, the not only just business knowledge, but the people skill knowledge that Ron is sharing with us is, it's invaluable.
Yeah,
it really,
I agree.
And Ron didn't wake up knowing that stuff. He's learned, and either he or somebody else, that he's worked for has probably paid quite a bit of money, and he's a self-starter and he learns a lot of things on his own too, but nobody's born with that kind of, almost nobody, with that kind of savvy.
Yeah.
For him to be sharing the stuff that he is, it's amazing. It really and truly is. I can listen to Ron talk all the time when he's talking about business and business models and business practice and how to handle people and that kind of stuff. And, on another note, I hope that some more of the manufacturers jump on board, with your podcast and what you've got going on here. I think it's a great positive thing for the industry. I hope it continues to grow, and I hope that you get more of a following so that we can, really get a better understanding in this business that we're all in business to make money, and we need to understand the difference of, of what wages are versus wages of profit on a job. A lot of people don't understand that I've talked to over the years. They think if they're making $1,000 a week, they're doing good. It's like, no. Let's break this down a little bit, and once I think people start to understand that, then it gets easier, and we've all crossed, we've all crossed bridges. I remember years ago, the first $10,000 estimate I put out.
Yeah.
I sat there, buddy, and I was like, oh, I don't know about this. That's an awful lot of money. I don't think they're going to go for it, and I was like, but I just don't know how I can do it any cheaper. I went in there, kept sharpening it. And I said, I got to send it, and I sent it. I got an email back in 10 minutes. well, when can you start? And, send us an invoice and we'll get you a deposit together.
Yeah.
And now it's to the point to where, it doesn't hurt my feelings to put, to put a pen to paper for 50,000, 60, 80, 100, 150,000, 200 grand. It doesn't matter. The number is what it is.
Yeah.
I don't have any reservations about selling it at all. But anyway.
Hey, I appreciate that. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your encouragement. I agree. Ron's been such a valuable asset to us all, and so giving of his time. It's really incredible. So, and some more manufacturers are coming on board real soon. So thank you, Tom. Awesome. We've got a lot of good things in the works for 2020. We're gonna keep moving this ship along.
Well, let me know what I can do to help.
Appreciate that, Tom. All right. Have a good day. Tile friends, stay profitable out there.